Welcome to the What They Hardly Warned Us About Voice of the Victims podcast, where we become the voice for the victims. Here we'll talk about domestic violence, toxic relationships, manipulation, control, sex, money, third-party interference, and the lack of help that many people who are in toxic relationships don't receive. Here's your host, Tisha Jones.
Hi, everybody. It is me, Tisha, from What They Hardly Warned Us About, Voice of the Victims podcast. Thank you super much for tuning in. I am so happy that you did. It has been a while since my last podcast, and that is because I myself have gone through so much. As you know, one of the reasons, or as you may know, one of the reasons that I started this podcast was because I myself was going through things that related to domestic violence, victim blaming, lack of help. And yes, I have been diagnosed with depression and anxiety. So I started the podcast, the Facebook pages and so forth for people who were going through the exact same thing. And I wanted to be a help. I wanted to be a support. I wanted to give the help and the support that I did not receive. But then I sort of crashed and burned, and it was actually before the pandemic. But I'm back now. I am well. I hope you all are well. And I just want to jump right into it. And I do wish you all the best. One thing that I want to talk about is, as you all know from my previous podcast, I deal with toxic relationships. And, so since I talk about victim blaming, I want to talk about 5 myths the church often believes about domestic violence. And I've come to find out that when you're dealing with church and domestic violence, it is easy for abusers to infiltrate places of great moral character. And as a matter of fact, I got that from the National Domestic Violence Hotline. I called them. And one of the counselors, they told me that you have abusers that will infiltrate in the field of medicine. You have abusers that will infiltrate the field of law enforcement, judges. When you look at, I'm on Facebook and I'm involved in various abuse groups. When you really, really look at when people go through divorce and they're divorcing an abuser, it's as if that abuser has help in the system, because it is usually the person, even if the abuse was documented, it is like the abuser, everyone wants to work with them and see the whole family, brought together. And it doesn't matter if the abuser doesn't, or the toxic individual doesn't really want to work together. They will just simply make the victim work with the abuser. And it's like, guys, come on. Seriously? Are you deaf? Are you blind? But also come to find out it's like that in church. And one of the reasons, and I've come to find, I believe that many churches are well-intentioned when they are trying to work with people, but unfortunately they can get so manipulated by the abuser or the toxic individual, because the abuser or the toxic individual, what they do is they're Oscar-winning actors and actresses. They know how to show you what you want to see, and they know how to play the system. They know how to fit in, infiltrate, as I said earlier. They know how to do those things, and then they will sit there and they'll join up with a brother, join up with a sister, get married. And then when they start showing themselves in the home, because more often than not, abusers and toxic individuals, they don't show themselves publicly. They show what the person wants to see. They show what the people want to see. They don't show themselves in the home, or how they act behind closed doors, or in circles where the person is not there, where the crowd is not there. So when the victim starts crying out for help, more often than not, the church draws a blank on that person, because they want to see the person who is being complained about They want to see that person brought up and matured and so forth. And my thing is, you don't want to sit up here and sacrifice a good person for a bad person. I want to see this person, he or she, him or her, made and grown up. Don't sacrifice a good sister or a good brother for a bad sister or a bad brother. So I'm taking this information that I'm about to give you from Lifeway Research, and it is written by, and I might chop this person's last name up, so bear with me, forgive me. It's written by R.J. Thesman, and I am going to put this website on my blog page. So let's start. So I'm going to read this. Kathy sits in her car and counts her cash. She just dropped off her kids at school and reminded the principal that no one else can pick up her children, not even their father, especially not their father. Now, Kathy is a pseudonym, but the story is real because 1 in 4 women live in destructive relationships. And many of these women, they go to church every Sunday. They sit next to the abuser, the father of their children. So the fact that domestic violence in the church is well documented within police departments and counseling offices. But of course, in the church itself, it remains in secret and a great source of denial. So let's talk about 5 myths that churches often believe about domestic violence. And myth number 1 is it doesn't happen in Christian homes. Now, before I start telling you the stories that are written here, I remember very early in the newness of my salvation when I would often hear something along the lines, saints don't do that. Christians don't do that. This doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. Or even within our church, I would hear things said, that doesn't happen here. Well, people are people, and in any organization, even in the best of churches, you have good people, great people. And then, of course, you have not so good, not so great people. So a lot of times I concur with myth number 1. It doesn't happen in Christian homes. So this woman, Miss R.J. Thesman, she says, as a biblical counselor and life coach, she has sat across from weeping women of various denominations. The struggle is real. She's read the stats about Christian women who live in destructive relationships, and these are from the women who report the abuse. So therefore, some of the husbands, they use the church to hide their manipulative behaviors. And again, they use their jobs in the police department, their jobs in medicine. They do great things for the community and the community applauds them. But again, you don't know how these people are living at home. So she said one of her clients gave permission to tell her story. A particular woman and her husband served as missionaries in the Middle East. Throughout their 40-year marriage, he abused her, even in front of the children. She had no options for help because domestic abuse would mean removal from the mission field. Now, I don't understand why that is. However, she loved the people and the region where she served and believed that God wanted her to be a missionary. Finally, when she reached adulthood, her children, their children, begged her to separate from their father to save her life. So she currently lives alone now, and she lives with the damaging effects of PTSD, false guilt, and health-related issues caused by years of trauma. So there's no more to that story. However, what does it mean that domestic abuse would mean removal from the mission field? You're divorced now, so you can't serve on the mission field. So you just stay there and deal with it. You just stay there and you put up with him putting his hands on you, abusing you, if you want to stay on the mission field. How much sense does that make? Look at what she had to suffer as a result. She was in it for 40 years. Now she deals with PTSD. She has false guilt and health issues caused by years of trauma. Now, what is false guilt? It doesn't indicate it here in this article, but in my opinion, being a woman, I know a lot of times we talk about if I had not have done this, it wouldn't have turned out like that. Or if I would not have, he would not have. Years ago, I remember I was sitting in a church service somewhere in the world, and the preacher a male preacher was preaching about domestic violence, and he described it that in other words, you keep talking in the home, then he slaps you upside your head. Now you want to come crying about the fact that he hit you. And basically, because you didn't stop talking, that's why your husband hit you. And not understanding that you could be quiet as a mouse. Domestic violence abusers are very insecure people. They will find something to get angry about. Why wasn't there a plan put in place to help her? Now, again, I'm only reading part of the story of what went down there, but she'll be removed off of the mission field if she reported domestic violence. Myth 2, and I know this is a big one with me and with a lot of people that I know. Submission will solve the problem. While some pastors provide caring counsel when women come forward, many victims hear the same rote answers when they dare to ask for help. When it comes to domestic violence, pastors often don't know how to respond to victims. So therefore, I would definitely encourage you, drop the pride, get some domestic violence counseling outside of the church and bring it inside of the church. When a church affirms an abusive man's role as head of the home, it gives a carte blanche to men who need to be in control. A great number of ministry leaders will quote the passage, such as Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22, "Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands, as it is fit in the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church." 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, and Titus 2, 3, and 5, as they remind women to submit and pray for their husbands and to have quiet and obedient spirits. These practices may work well within healthy relationships, but submission to an abuse gives him further license to abuse. The main characteristic of an abusive relationship is rooted in the soil of power and their desire to control. When the church affirms a man's abusive role, as I said, it gives them a carte blanche. There was a woman somewhere in the United States where her husband used to beat her. And she said, actually it was more than one, now that I remember it was 2. And it was said that the first one said she was told to submit so much that she drew, this is not her word, she drew a hatred for the church. She got very resentful of the church. Another woman just got tired of being told to submit so much. She eventually left the church. We need to have the hard conversations inside of these relationships. We need to have hard conversations. And we need to stop taking, as I heard someone say, taking the easy route. You're talking to the victim and you're telling the victim everything they need to do. You need to be pastors enough, ministers enough, Christian enough to have the hard conversations with the person that is causing the pain, that's causing the problem. Now, I understand that in Christian relationships, when it comes down to abuse, like I said, what this author of this article wrote, pastors often don't know how to respond to victims. So many times when people are going through really bad things behind closed doors, they feel that it is the woman's duty as a saint to go through hardness as a good soldier in Jesus Christ. And I don't doubt that to a certain extent, but When you're dealing with abuse and violence, it's that person that needs the help, the immediate help, not the one that's throwing the stones. Again, we need to stop normalizing telling the person who needs help, the victim, everything they need to do to live in the home with that person. And we need to actually learn how to stand up to people and even provide safe resources for people who are actually in behind closed doors with abusers. Myth number 3, it's the woman's fault. This myth follows the natural segue from myth 2. If the woman is experiencing abuse, it's because she isn't acting like a Christian wife. The root of this attitude travels all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 12, when Adam shamed Eve. This woman you gave to me, she gave me the fruit to eat. The injured women that go into this woman's office have reported comments of shame, blame. If you just give him more sex, I have heard that. He's frustrated at work, so he takes it out on you. That I already know. Can you fix yourself up better? You know, he sees attractive women all day at work. All those 3 things I have heard in my own circumstance. But get this. Listen to this. If you are driving, please grip the steering wheel or whatever, because I do not want you to have an accident. Listen to this. The situation that topped all was a woman who finally escaped from the basement where her husband had kept her prisoner. She was afraid to call the police, but trusted her pastor. When she told him her story, he said, if you lose 30 pounds, he'd like you better. Before I go on, I want to say, did you note that I said she escaped the basement where her husband had kept her prisoner? So basically it was all over those 30 pounds. The 30 pounds is what locked her in that basement. The 30 pounds is what caused him to be abusive. It was those 30 pounds. You know, I've heard people say, yeah, he's wrong to do what he did, but I got the impression that you were the problem. I got the impression that if you would just, as if when you stop and think about abuse that happened to women, and I know that abuse happens to men, I will do a podcast related to those topics. When you stop and think about the abuse that actually happens to women, do you not stop and think that women give everything to make their marriages work? Many women give everything that they have to give to make marriages work. So they probably worked with the weight issue. They worked with, being submissive, the dutiful wife, being quiet and so forth, trying to be everything that he liked. When you're dealing with an abusive person, male or female, it's not about you're doing something that I don't like. It's about power and control. I feel insensitive. No. I feel insecure about what I'm going through, so I'm going to take it out on you. So this woman could very well be a supermodel. We know that there are many men in Hollywood that have gorgeous wives, and they cheat on them too. This was the same woman who returned to my office several weeks later with a broken jaw. So, of course, it was those 30 pounds that broke that woman's jaw. Come on, people, come on. If you are pastors or ministers listening to this, come on. And I know some of the defensiveness that goes along with it. We don't do that here. That happens in other places. We don't do that here. Well, it might have happened once or twice. Come on, people. We really need to normalize helping people where they need help and stop taking the easy route and going to the person and giving 50 million words of lecture to the person that's actually crying out for help, as opposed to the person who's committing the problem And we need to have real life solutions to help men, help women, help children especially. Myth number 4, domestic abuse isn't as bad as domestic violence. Another pastor dismissed a weeping woman with the statement, I don't see any bruises or broken bones, so you don't have it bad. I've heard things like that too. I've heard things where people will get in pulpits and they'll preach messages, he brings you to church, he gets up and goes to work for you. You ought to be grateful. Guess what? Domestic abusers get up and go to work. Domestic abusers will bring you to church. Domestic abusers will tell you off on the way to church. Domestic abusers will get to church and find their auxiliary, serve on their auxiliary while you're sitting in the pews crying. So you should be grateful because they brought you to church. You should be grateful because they brought their check home. Let me finish with this and I'll get more into what I'm going to say. The author goes on to say abusive behaviors such as name calling, shaming her in front of the children, criticizing what she wears, controlling the finances, forcing her to give you sex. Yes, it is possible to be raped by your spouse, often lead to more violent behaviors. But even if it doesn't, that to say that somebody doesn't have it bad, if you're not in that situation, how can you say what someone has bad? There was a person who made a comment to me years ago, and I'm hoping that the person made the comment just in ignorance and so forth, was going through some things really, really, really bad. And I have to be careful with what I say on the air. But there was another person who had really gone through some horrible domestic violence things. And she minimized what I was going through. She said, I wish all I had to go through is what you're going through. And I was kind of insulted by that. I'm not going to deny she was going through really, really badly. Because what she had gone through was really, really bad. But I was enduring gaslighting, mind games, manipulation, got to the point, barely had enough to eat, me and my children. One time I was walking to Home Depot. All I had was a credit card, and all I could do was feed my children soda and chips. And I was praying, wondering why God was allowing me to go through this. And everyone wanted to coddle my spouse, and I had dealt with him putting me down and telling me how fine and beautiful other women were and so forth and so on. And it was long standing, and only a select amount of people believed me. And I can count them all on one hand and not even use all the fingers. But those who were empowered to help, they bought into his nice guy demeanor. And it was just really, really hurtful. And then when I had this particular friend who I thought understood what I was going through say, I wish all I had to go through is what you're going through. It's like, whatever, just really whatever. And the last myth, and this is a big one. Myth 5. If an abuser is truly sorry and forgiven, the relationship should be reconciled. One thing that I do know before I read to you what this person has said is divorce, remarriage. That is a hot button topic among many Christians. And I'm not going to address it, but I'm going to say that it is a hot button topic. And I know that I've heard people say things like, well, if he's saved, you can't divorce him and things of that nature. But I want to deal with it from this capacity. Some people know how to play the game. Think about men who don't have, or even women who don't have any church affiliations. When you get ready to walk out on them, or you move on with your life, they show up, they're so nice, they're so sweet, they're so sorry, they're so apologetic, and they're pleading with you, to take them back and so forth, and not understand why they messed everything up. There was a song years ago. I was a child when this song came out. I'm not going to quote the song because I don't want to get in trouble. I'm kind of still new at this. But this man was singing. It was so beautiful. And he was singing about reconciliation, and he was reciting, how he messed things up and he wanted another chance. And I know you were trying to build up everything, and I wrecked it. And he sang so sweetly to the woman. This was a song that came out back in the 80s. He sang so sweetly to the woman, and he sang it the way that a woman would want to hear it. Come to find out, it was reported that he was an abuser in real life, that he actually was an abuser. And it was like, that was so amazing because he knew how to deliver the lyrics in this song of apologizing, acknowledging the fact that she had really tried to build this relationship, pleading with her, not to leave him alone, telling her that he loved her and all. And that song had me mesmerized. But like I said, come to find out that it was fiction. It was all just fiction. And some people, they know how to live that fiction. Some people know how to come to church and pretend to be sorry. Pretend. They know how to play the role, and they know how to play the role for an amount of time. That's called the honeymoon phase. They know how to do it, and they know how to get in front of the preachers, the pastors, the ministers, and talk about, I'm so sorry. I'm really, really, really sorry. But in reality, no, they're not. Statistically, so now I'm going to read. Statistically, victims will return to the destructive relationship 7 times before they leave for good. Women like Kathy believe their husband's tears. Yet, after years of manipulation and abuse, these women's brains are numb. If they have been repeatedly hit or shaken, they may have brain damage and can't discern the truth. Church leaders who require victims to forgive and reconcile do not fully understand the scope of trauma. I understand, according to biblical standards, that, we should forgive, and pastors, ministers, and all, should help work with people, because they have to work through their anger. People who have been in domestic violence relationships, they have to work through their anger. I had to work through my anger. I had to go to therapy. I'm going to talk to you about therapy in a little bit. I had to go through therapy to work through so much anger. That is one thing my therapist said. She said, when I first started talking to you, you were so angry. And I was. It was a lot I was angry about, that stretched all the way back to childhood. So I understand having to forgive, but yes, you need to work with people to help them, to forgive, but to demand that they reconcile with the person. Because like I said, they don't understand, like I read, they don't understand the scope of trauma. But like I said, people, they know how to play the act. And like I said, it's the honeymoon period. They know how to just act right for a period. But then also there's something else. Whether or not a woman gets head trauma, there comes a time when over is just over. It's over. Whether I stay here in the home with you or not, it's just over. I don't love you like that anymore. I love you as a Christian. As a Christian should love another person, but I don't love you as a spouse anymore. I don't love you as that particular person anymore. There comes a time when you push and you push and you push, and it is really, really over. So how can church ministry leaders help these women so they don't become a tragic statistic? Here we go. Number 1, listen and validate. If a woman is desperate enough to admit the abuse to her pastor, she deserves attention. Listen carefully, ask pointed questions, take notes. One time I was talking to someone and I said, I just want to be validated. And they said, and then what? I was dumbfounded. This is after telling me that I was the problem. I was dumbfounded, because I know that they were saying, but then you have to continue to live. So what if we validate you? You still have to go back in the home and live and, deal with all of that, whatever. And I'm just like floored. I was floored. That was 2009 when someone said that to me. Listen and validate. Again, if a woman is desperate enough to admit the abuse to her pastor, If she finds enough courage to come forward, she deserves attention. Listen carefully. Ask pointed questions. Take notes. Number 2, train leaders. Invite counselors and leaders of nonprofits who work with women's issues to train church leaders. When we're educated, we can devise a plan of action. Some people honestly feel that because they've been ministers for a long time, a little pride might get in there, and they feel as though I'm a minister. I know I'm God's minister. God taught me how to be a minister. Then why do we have abuse in the church? And then why do we handle it wrong if I taught you? There's nothing wrong with getting more help where help is. Provide church resources. Before I read this, I have a page, and periodically I post on my page, my Facebook page, paid and free resources for people to get help. And I just recently updated the list. Church libraries should stock resources for domestic abuse, helpful websites, and phone numbers for safe homes. Check current policies. Does your church have a written no tolerance policy? Is there an advocate on your team who provides support for women in your church, your staff, or even the pastor's wife? I don't know who remembers a situation that was even made into a TV movie years ago where this pastor, he was beloved of his congregation, but his wife killed him. Come to find out, there was abuse in the home for years. And she got to the point where she couldn't take it anymore, but she felt like she couldn't say anything because he lived such a good image in front of people. And she had to be on the front row, smiling and so forth. Grateful that she did not go to jail. I hope you all don't get mad at me because I said that. Offer practical help. So let me tell you this real quick. Let's go real quickly. One of the main reasons women stay in abusive relationships is financial. Is there a church member with rental property where a woman like Kathy in this story can stay? Are there coaches or counselors on staff who can help Kathy create a plan of action? Going back to the first one, is there a church member with rental property? I've come to find that when women need to make a free break or whatever, you have people who have the resources to help, but want to say things with, go ask your pastor if you can do that. Don't misunderstand me. I know that even the church leadership needs to be in the loop, but I don't feel like it's right for you to leave your spouse, so I'm not going to help. What if it were your daughters in a situation like that? Will the youth pastor or children's minister step up to provide emotional support for the children? The older I get and the more I learn, I realize there is so much that children, they need to hear. They go through certain things and they don't quite know how to express it. But especially if you don't have a team of people that know how to listen. Sometimes you have people that want to do all the talking, talk over the children, tell them what they think that the child should know, but they don't actually listen to the child. Is there a children's minister, youth pastor, or someone great with children to provide emotional support for the children? Are the elders willing to confront the husband to help him address his issues and work toward his emotional healing instead of expecting wife to be therapist? Does the church have a benevolence fund to help Kathy pay electric bills, rent, or cost of counseling? Is there a food ministry to provide meals for Kathy and her children? Does anyone own a business that needs an employee who can help Kathy find a job? Which woman has lived through domestic abuse will come alongside Kathy and provide emotional support and not sit there and say things like, I wish all I had to go through was what you're going through because what you went through is nowhere near as bad as what I went through. Stop all that garbage. Just stop it. Come on. Even your friends, they're not your emotional punching bags, because you're going through. You're going to say something like that to them because they love you and they'll forgive you, but you don't even know how to apologize. Come on. So, ministry leaders can no longer deny that abuse happens within the church. as we step up and help the Kathys among us, we also influence the next generation. As children watch the church becomes a force of good, they will begin to trust ministry leaders and create their own faith walk. As the community sees the church as a place that practices Christ-like protective love. And that is this article, and I am posting it on my page, www.fewwarnings.buzzsprout.com. Few Warnings is FEWWARNINGS Buzz, BUZZ, Sprout, SPROUT.com. So I'm going to post the resources to this article on my page. And before we depart, I do want to talk to you really quickly about therapy. As I told you, I get therapy. As women, we were raised that we didn't go to get therapy. We were raised to believe that what happens in a home stays in a home. And just like I told you about, just read, we were taught to not talk about our spouses because it will make them look bad. We were told to be strong and handle it. If we tried to talk about our issues, we were silenced and told that we were complaining and being emotional. I know, because that's exactly one of the things that I was complaining. We were stigmatized as the emotional female. And a lot of times we were ignored. As time went on, a lot of us, we try to hold the family together and we fall apart. But we realize that we need help that others just can't provide. I realized that I needed help that I just wasn't getting. And so that's why I went to therapy. And yes, double times yes. It's refreshing to talk to someone who's on my side and care about my issues and not sit there and tell me that, it was or imply that it was my responsibility to change my spouse or other people. It was a blessing, just grateful to talk to someone who was interested in my well-being, somebody who didn't judge me or belittle me, when I said I was hurting, and somebody who just didn't stigmatize me, practice victim blaming, when I said that's how I felt. It is refreshing to talk to someone who listened to me. And if any of that's true with you, then I'm going to encourage you to get online therapy. So there are two sites that I advocate, online-therapy.com and Talkspace. With Talkspace, you get $100 off your first month. Online therapy, you get 20% off your first month, which the program comes with all the tools you need for whatever is hindering you to live a happier life, a more productive life. So go ahead take the first step, just like I did. And the link, it'll be attached to this site. And before you go, because this is pretty much it, I am on Patreon and I would love your support. So of course, that's www.patreon.com/few warnings. Again, that is www.patreon.com/few warnings. I appreciate it. And this episode is open for comments. So thank you so much for listening, and I really appreciate it. Take care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the What They Hardly Warned Us About, Voice of the Victims with Tisha Jones. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to tell a friend and leave your comments. Also, make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to our podcast on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Podcast, Podchaser, Podcast Addict, Stitcher, and Spotify. Additionally, you can follow us on YouTube at What They Hardly Warned Us About, on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at Few Warnings. And for donations, gifts, and love offerings, feel free to use our Cash App at Few Warnings. Finally, if you find that you need help in any facet of your life, please visit our webpage, fewwarnings.buzzsprout.com, for important free resources and for valuable links attached to each episode to help you get the help you need. Remember, the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. See you next time. Bye-bye.